All right. In this hour, we'll be talking about ensuring inclusion of persons with disabilities in employment and social spaces. We were going to have this conversation a few days ago, but look, we're having it today, and no time like the present, as we would normally say. Harun Maalim Hassan is the executive director of the National Council for Persons with Disabilities, and he's here with us this morning. Harun, good morning.
Good morning.
Karibu sana.
Thank you so much.
Good to have you here again.
Yeah.
You are in the hot seat, as usual, either way. And even as we look at some of those issues, I think often best placed when experience is able to decide or able to inform about certain matters. So even as we get into that conversation, Siti is going to welcome you with today's proverb, and then you tell us what you think about that and what it means to you.
Thank you.
Right, our proverbs for the whole of this week have been from the Republic of the Congo, otherwise known as Congo Brazzaville. Okay? While you have teeth, you can break bones.
What do you think?
Maybe in the context of the office I sit,
Yes.
if you have an enforcement capacity,
Yes.
you can effect changes in a society.
There you go.
Yes, wonderfully said.
Wonderfully said.
Wonderfully said, yes. Clearly, this is a proverb that can be applied to very many life situations.
Indeed.
Yes.
Well, okay. So in this conversation today, talking about inclusion of persons living with disability in employment and social spaces. All right, just give us an overview. When we talk about inclusion, what exactly are we saying when it comes to employment and social spaces specifically?
Thank you so much. Inclusion generally means, in the contemporary context, that everybody is equal before the law and live in a barrier-free society where they enjoy equal right with everybody without any restriction. That's what inclusive society is all about. And in the context more specific to persons with disabilities, understanding different forms of disabilities and the barriers they contend with, and addressing the issues of the barrier so that you can enable this person to enjoy equal right with everybody. And then maybe if I demonstrate by an example, if your disability is blind, the biggest of your barrier is access to communication. Are we providing our information in an accessible format? You know, if someone is deaf, it's more of also communication. Are we having a provision where we have sign language interpreters? Or are we employing sign language interpreters in our premises or institution so that this person don't, miss out? If you're a wheelchair user like me, it's more of built environment. How accessible is our institutions, If it is attitudinal, but all forms of disabilities also contend with one thing, attitudinal barrier. How the society sees someone who's appearing or look different than them. And how can we embark on serious advocacy and sensitization to raise awareness that we were just different and disability is just a human diversity, just the way there's a tall guy, a short person, we're just a diversity, So that is what inclusive means, is now address the issue of the barrier and allow everybody to enjoy in equal footing.
For us to have this discussion, it means that inclusivity doesn't exist. Or if it does, it falls far short of what would actually then qualify as inclusivity. So the question is, why does this situation exist?
Well, it exists because of a number of things. Some touches around culture, the way we are cultured. You see, disability is seen as punishment, as an act of God, wrongly though, for a sin committed by you or by your parent,
somebody on your behalf,
or something like that. That's why. And then, of course, low awareness around issues of inclusion itself. And before even the Act and the Constitution of Kenya and many laws that created, including this report, the content I will share with, assuming or having that assumption that someone with disability need to be taken care of only, that he or she don't have to care for him or herself.
And they cannot contribute.
And they can't contribute. So it's more of a charity model, that when you see someone on a wheelchair or someone blind, more of it's an obligation from the charity perspective. Just give them some freebies, make them feel good. With the famous cliche, disability is not inability, something like that, So I think it has to do deep-rooted, culture, and the circumstances that were there before,
What is the state of things? Because by the time we are agitating and advocating for inclusion of persons with disabilities in the employment sector as well as in social places, that means there is a deficiency. That means that it's not up to scratch. So what's the situation right now? If we look around the country and say, okay, if you were to say 0 to 100, Kenya's faring at X percent, what would that look like?
Yeah, before I respond to that, first we have to look at the situation of access to education. Access to education to enable this person to be equipped with the necessary skills and knowledge to compete with others, in employment opportunities or other social spaces, So you see, it's a challenge for this child right from the word go to go to school. And the transitions from one level to another become even a problem. Completion is another issue altogether. For example, if roughly, it's not empirically, but most people drop out at the different stages because of their disability. Because sometimes you go to universities or colleges, they're not accommodative enough for you to continue. And for the few now who have managed and soldiered on to graduate and have college diplomas and college degree, the issue of employment becomes an issue.
Right.
According to the report by Public Service Commission, on values and principle, the year 2022-2023, for example, persons with disabilities employed in the public sector stands at 1.53%. 1.53%. This means that the workforce in the public sector in Kenya is 253,318. And the persons with disabilities are 3,794. Constitutionally, we're supposed to reach 5%.
Okay.
And we are at 1.53%. What does that mean then? Do we have people with disabilities who are competing for this job or they're not there? The question is, yes, they're there. And if I go deeper in terms of breaking down these public entities, for example, constitutional commissions and independent offices, there are 10 organizations. And then the number of persons employed in these institutions are 4,622. And the persons with disabilities employed in this body is 60, translating to 1.3%. In ministries and states department, there are 49 institutions employing 105,539. Meaning 1,284 are persons with disability out of that number, translating to 1.22%. In public universities, there are 39 institutions, 28,359 are the workforce, 573 are persons with disabilities, and this is 2.02%. At least public universities, they have reached a mark of 2%. And then we have state corporations and sagas like ours, and there are 210. There are 99,704 workforce, meaning a person with people with disability, there are 100,765, translating to 1.77%. And then statutory commissions and authorities, 8 institutions with workforce of 1,942, and 34 are persons with disabilities, translating to 1.75%. And lastly, TVETs, Technical Vocational Training Institutes, 204 institutions with workforce of 13,152, and persons with disabilities here are 172, meaning 1.31%. So in total, there are 520 institutions, public institutions, and the workforce is 253,318, translating to persons with disabilities as 3,888, 1.53%. And as a council, we mandated to police literally and oversight this performance. And last week Thursday we released this report, status report on disability inclusion. This report is about performance contracting, where one of the indicators by Public Service Performance Management Unit is disability. 418 institutions signed that contract. 418.
Out of how many?
Out of over 500, eh?
Okay.
Yes, 520, of 500, 420, sorry, 418 signed that contract. And out of that 418 that signed the contract, 367 reported to the council. The rest they have not. They have signed the obligation, meaning there might not be a consequence on them. And that's what we want to find out. But 367 reported to us on 3 key sub-indicators. 1, on issues of employment, formulating policies on employment status. And 2, on product and services for persons with disabilities or staff with disabilities within their institutions. And then 3, quarterly reports. Are they submitting the report in the format that's required? But I want to draw your attention to this on the executive side. This contract in performance by Performance Management Unit in the PCO performance contract is commissions and independent offices are not binded. County governments are not binded. And independent offices are not also binded.
Why not?
Parliaments are not binded. Judiciaries are not binded. There's no framework. That's what we are working on to see to it that there should be a clear framework of how the parliament also can report, judiciaries can report, commissions, independent offices can report, and county government. So this 480 is just an executive arm of the government.
Let me jump in there and ask who would be responsible for developing this framework under which then, because essentially what we're looking at here is across board. Because when you talk about this inclusion, you're not just talking about particular areas. We're saying across board, isn't it?
Exactly.
But we're also saying at the same time that because there's no framework to then enlist or require certain offices or certain institutions to have this requirement, then it is difficult to enforce.
Exactly.
It's difficult to even demand. So who would then be responsible for developing this framework?
In the executive side is Ministry for Public Services, where CS Kure is the Cabinet Secretary. And it's a negotiated process. And this performance indicator, disability is just one of the indicators. There are other indicators, like road safety and other things. So even in other arms of the government, we have to engage their leadership, in a negotiated manner to come up with a framework, how to enforce the necessary laws, articles within the Constitution on what inclusion is all about. And that's what, as a council, we are working on. And that actually rhymes with the proverb from the Congo. Do we have, as a council, the enforcement capacity to effect some of these things? Because the law that created us makes us more of an implementer, not a regulator. And that is where we've somehow missed also some points. And we don't have necessary enforcement capacity to do some of the things. But that law right now is under amendment. And our minister actually has taken strides in pushing that amendment. It has gone through the Senate. It's now the National Assembly toward the tail end. And if it is passed, and unfortunately I have to emphasize that's the only piece of law that has not conformed with the current constitution. It's older than the constitution, and it is older than Convention on the Right of Persons with Disabilities, which is part of the laws of Kenya. So if this passes, probably a lot of things will going to happen, and we're going to have more of a teething to bite to enforce some of these laws. Coming to this report.
Yes, please go ahead.
Out of the 367, there are 2 commissions, and we have to laud them, voluntarily on their own, reported to us. The Teacher Service Commission and National Land Commission, in the manner that is prescribed in the performance contracting guidelines. And they're doing quite, well. And here, if you look at the issue of the employment, out of these 367 that has reported, 240, translating to 65%, don't have a single person with disabilities in the workforce. 240 don't have a single person. And then only 13 out of these 367% have reached the threshold of 5% and above, 13, and making it 4%. The rest, they have 1, 2, between 1% to 3.5 or 4.5%. So the situation, if it comes to employment, is really, really a problem for persons with disabilities. Yes.
Let me ask this question. How many people are there who are living with disabilities in Kenya and who have requisite qualifications to be employed. Okay, let me break it down. How many people living with disabilities are there in Kenya? Let's start there.
Great. According to Kenya National Bureau of Statistics,
Yes.
their last census,
Yes.
there are slightly less than 1 million people with disabilities in Kenya. Unfortunately, this figure is being contested by persons with disabilities and the stakeholders because it is way below, empirically defined or, statistics that is accepted universally of 15 to 16% of any population that is related to persons with disabilities. And we've engaged KNBS. Why did this happen? The tool that they used, which is called Washington sets of questions, were not all analyzed. If they would have been all analyzed, it would have been translated to more than 10%, which means about 6 million Kenyans will have had a disability. So right now we're working with KNBS and looking for the resources to conduct a baseline survey to invalidate that. Disability is on rise through road accident, things like blood pressure, hypertension, a number of things are raising persons, cases of disability. So it's a fact that we can't run away from. But on question of how many people are qualified for a job or, for employment in Kenya, we might not have that data. But as a council, we run a portal called Career Portal, where even these MDAs, Ministry, Department, agencies, report to us by this framework. And also, advertised through there. There are about 6,000, about precisely 5,600 something job seekers with disabilities who are registered in that portal. And then there are over 400 entities, both private sector, but mostly public sector, who advertise through there. You see, 5,600 is not a small number.
No.
Already what we are saying is the people who are in the public forces, 3,794 out of 253,318. So you can imagine 5,600 plus who are jobless. And every year, the others who are joining from colleges, and universities. So the numbers to fill the 5% and above is there truly.
The other question that swelling in my mind is, who qualifies to be a person living with a disability?
A good question. These days, as I respond to that, because disability presented opportunities, my friend, many people want to become disabled. Surprising. Because you are told if you are earning up to a certain amount, you are tax exempted.
Yes.
You enjoy the duty-free car.
Yes.
You enjoy, access to Agbo thing and other preferential or affirmative. So you find people who are not truly the impairment defined as a disability are becoming people with disabilities. So the disability, as per the laws of Kenya, and even what is universally accepted, it has to do with your impairment that makes it difficult for you to do what is ordinarily easier for you to do every day. Generally. For example, if you don't have a finger or if you don't have a wrist, it's different.
Very true.
Yes, it's absolutely very different. So to what extent is your impairment impacting on your everyday life? So the process is done through medical assessment, and it's through a guidelines that is developed by Ministry of Health. It is called Disability Medical Assessment and Categorization Guidelines. And before, it was so centralized, and it was at the Afya House here in Nairobi, that the director of the medical services must sign after, you pass through assessment in health facilities across the country. And then that signature become an instruction to the council to register that person. But of late we say, if the devolution is about bringing service closer to people, why shouldn't we not take this signature to the counties? So we went into a very strong engagement with the Ministry of Health and other stakeholders, and we took now that agenda to the county directors of health. So now the assessment is down at the county medical facilities, level 4 and level 5 and level 4 facilities are there. And then after it is signed, then it comes to us. But this time round, I have to also emphasize on this, we've embraced on technology to make it much more easier for persons with disabilities. And we have enlisted that on e-citizen platform. So what the client needs is only a medical report from a medical facility.
Right.
And then you go home, if you have internet connection, you get in and upload all your document and your information, and then you get a registration certificate, which has a QR code that can be verified.
So is what is being requested here, Harun, are we saying that there should be, in any institution, whether it be private, public, that what is being requested is that there should be some kind of quota?
Yes.
There should be a quota for hiring of persons with disabilities, so long as they are qualified for the position. Is that what we are saying?
Exactly.
Okay. How would that work? So that if I know that in a year I'm going to hire 10 people, what is the percentage that you're saying of these 10 people, a certain number then, or a certain percentage need to be persons living with disabilities, or persons with disabilities? But if, and many may say, well, the people that have come forward, do they meet the qualifications? So it's not regardless of anything. It is that persons with disabilities who meet qualifications, then this is the quota that has been set aside for them. How is that?
Yeah, exactly.
described?
The 5% is the constitutional requirement. But within the constitution itself, there is one word that has become an impediment in actualization of that 5%. Progressive implementation of 5%. So you can't measure the word progressive now. So because of that particular word progressive, we find many entities employing only one person out of 100 people they employ, and they take cover under the word progressive. So that's the thing that we are grappling with actually as a big challenge. So that can we say, then we say in negotiation and such a framework like PC, put 5% without any wording
after it.
Yes, whether it is public sector or private sector. And then, like in this PC, there's a framework now where they report to us. We develop other framework. For example, like right now, we want to engage county government. And we're also engaging parliament so strongly. How we can negotiate with them that, how can we do in the oversight and in the representation? And even in legislation, which is important, that we specifically define this quota. Like issue of AGBO is where there was a big problem over the years. Because it said 30%, so person with disability might not enjoy exactly how much, So they ended up having 1% or even less than 1.
When they could have more.
When they could have had more. Yeah, so we say let us have deliberate quota, attached to it, And then we say when you're employing, even though some entities, they do, clearly indicate their persons with disabilities are encouraged to apply. They might put it just for formality.
And not really mean it.
Sometimes, even I give you an example of my own case. When I became someone with disability a couple of years ago, and I wanted to change, career, I went for an interview. I applied for a job, and I went for an. Unfortunately, the building where the interview is supposed to be conducted is not accessible. So the guys who are to do the interview, they have to hurriedly come down. I might not have got that job. I don't know whether I failed in the interview or whether it is because of my disability. But you can imagine, I have not declared my disability in my application.
Yes.
So sometimes some people with disability don't declare because they fear they will not be even called for
They'll be locked out
interview
from the very beginning.
Yes, because the employers see disability as expensive because you have to reorganize your office, you have to employ a personal guide, if someone is blind, there's an extra cost. So people are running away from that extra cost. What they don't know is that there's a tax relief associated with employing the persons with disability if you make a reasonable accommodation within your workspace.
Harun, Maalim Hassan is the executive director of the National Council for Persons with Disability, and we're talking about inclusion in employment and social spaces. We looked at employment a little bit. When we talk about social spaces, where are we talking about here? That the assumption is that you can go wherever you need to go regardless of your ability. When we speak of social spaces, what then is the core here?
The core here is how accessible is our services. With its information, with its built environment, with its participating, in everyday living. But as I respond to that, I want to draw your attention to this report that we have released, last Thursday. And I want to tell you the ranking of the institutions in Kenya, how they are fared in terms of inclusion and even social spaces, as per regard to inclusion for persons with disabilities. For example, in the ministries, we have 23 ministries.
Yeah.
And I want to tell you the scores, the composite performance scores of ministries. And this is determined literally by averaging the performance metrics of the State Department and the agencies are under there. So I want to tell you, it's quite very unfortunate that number one ministry with 17 institutions under it that fairly scored as number one is Ministry of Water, Sanitation and Irrigation, and it is at 53.9%. The rest of other ministries are less than 50%. The second ranking ministry is Ministry of Energy and Petroleum at 48.27% with 11 institutions under it. And the third ministry is Ministry of Roads and Transport, 41.25% in terms of the composite score, with 21 institutions. And Ministry of Education with 187 institutions is 38.14%. And then if we break down under State Department now, and there are about 50, the State Department here is 36 that reported to us. Number one, with 10 institutions under it, is the State Department for Basic Education, and they have 58.8%. Number two is State Department for Energy, 54.85%. And number three is State Department for Irrigation 53.7%. Overall, only five state departments scored 50% and above. And even none have reached even 60%. The rest that is the situation, the way we are talking about inclusion.
If I may bother you,
yes.
Explain this percentile representation again. When somebody has 48%, what does that mean? Somebody has 20%, what does that mean?
What it means, like if I pick ministries, is the composite scores of all state departments under them. Like Ministry of Water and Sanitation, there are 17 institutions under them. And each institution report in this performance contracting on three things: formulating policies on employment for persons with disabilities in a subscribed format that they have to report. Have they done? An issue of product and services for persons with disabilities and staff with disability within their institutions. And number three, quarterly reports on the progressiveness of those sub-indicators within the institutions. And all of them are ranked. It is clearly guided through the performance contracting guidelines, how they are scored and marks. Those marks were put together, and that's how these gradings come about. So we are fairly doing bad in terms of inclusion. If employment, even Public Service Commission is agreeing with us, because in this report of ours it is 1.32%.
Yeah.
But in Public Service Commission, it is 1.53%. Because ours is only on the executive and 367 institution. And then Public Service Commission is entire public institution, commissions, others. But the difference also is ours, if you say you have employed, you have to prove. And we have to prove with the details of that person that is captured in our database. So ours is a tight proof, that anywhere you have employed.
When you talk about public service as being now the ministry that would enact or then bring into being some of these requirements that we ask for, right? What kind of engagement takes place to have them even cast an eye on this report beyond reading it and say, okay, these are things then that we need to implement? What kind of engagement is currently going on to say this is actually something that we need to do? Because the numbers that you talk about are actually quite, poor. And to get those numbers to rise, there needs to be engagement beyond reading the report, but then going towards discussion and implementation. So who's having that conversation beyond them reading?
Now, this report first we share with all the entities that reported to us through this framework. This is the situation in your own institution. You need to improve, because in the performance contracting itself, you are scored and graded, and it's a contract that you have signed. Cabinet Secretary signed with the president, and the Cabinet Secretary signed with institution heads, with its sagas by the board and things like that. But as a council, what are we doing to ensure that the recommendations that are here, beautiful, rich recommendations, is worked on? One of the things that we do is we present it into the parliament. Like the first report we did last year, this is the second report. We gave to the committees of the parliament that when you are oversighting, when you are legislating, when you are representing, this is also a point of reference that you can pick on if you are speaking around matters inclusion, matters disability mainstreaming in this country. And National Assembly, for example, gladly, from the report of last year, they took it up. And for the first time, the Committee on National Cohesion came up with a report on the status of employment. And they surveyed 39, I don't know whether 36 or 39 institutions. And their report, which is shared with us and is to be tabled in the Parliament soon, it speaks to these reports of ours. So that you know now, because if you remember, or if you have been very keen, if it comes to cohesion, in employment particularly, people talk about ethnicity. Tribe A, Tribe B, yes. And it becomes headline.
And we in the media, we report it.
And the media also, instead of picking the largest minority, which is persons with disability, cutting across all the ethnic communities, you will have given it much more emphasis.
I can't remember ever having... Have you ever read any article which brings up the point that is being made here? I haven't.
Yes.
I haven't.
So no, like national cohesion reports, it speaks on Tribe A, they have the largest number. Tribe B, they have the largest number. You don't draw the attention toward disabilities. I would have even expected the status of the report on this disability inclusion to be a national news, literally. Yes, we have people. Why are we not having 5%, employment? How are we making our workspace, our environment, adjustable? So I think those are the things. But we also present to even other arms of the government. For example, like judiciary. For example, if people are not employed, or if they have challenges within even their own employment, in terms of progression, in terms of reasonable accommodation, it touches on justice. How is our justice system? In terms of access, in terms of affordability, in terms of being sensitive to this population is concerned. Those are the things that we need to query, as a country. County government, there are some that is doing amazing. They come up with laws, they establish a fund, but most county government are trailing also. So what are we doing? Because you find some counties saying disability is a function of national government. Like there's a space called national, where people live.
Yes.
It's quite strange. Yeah. So those are the hard thing that we really need to interrogate.
So is it a shared responsibility when you say, it's national, it's county? Is it a shared responsibility, or is it a unified collective responsibility when it comes to making sure that you actually then do have proper inclusion across board?
It's a collective responsibility.
Okay.
Because, if you are planning for your county, people with disabilities are part and parcel of the communities there. They are voters there. They are the local communities there. So how is your county integrated development plan sensitive on matters inclusion? How is it reading together with constitution, for example? Because you don't have to implement another law. You drive your agenda out of the constitution and even other act of laws, Those are the areas that disconnect. 2 months ago, we released a report, a research supported by the USAID on the landscape analysis on counties and national level on the situation of disability mainstream. The situation is bad. Yes. And then out of that is a recommendation that now we are working with development partners. How can that recommendation be, when we are disseminating, we'll be rolling out soon the framework of rolling it out with action plan on how even counties, independent commissions and offices and commissions, parliaments, judiciaries also look inward, on their role, not only staffing at their own, but their own role, to ensure that we all collectively build inclusive society. Yes.
Let me ask this question. Before you become an adult, you are a child, you're an adolescent. And we do have children and adolescents living with disabilities. How is the ground... No, let me revise what I'm about to ask. Does your institution look into ways and means by which that at this nascent stage, when people are still growing up, that the opportunities afforded to people living with disabilities are actually put in place so that, not that they have a fighting chance, so that they are on an even footing with other Kenyans?
Yeah, what we are pushing as a council, and I think the amendment, I think after here, even I'm traveling to Naivasha, where we are concluding on national disability policy. We don't have a policy in this country yet. It's about addressing what you've said, actually. How issues of disability is a business of everybody.
Yes. And of every segment of society.
Exactly. That it is a cross-cutting agenda.
Yes, it is.
If it is education, what is Ministry of Education doing
Yes.
in building inclusive education system in Kenya? If it is health, what is Ministry of Health doing to treat together with the person's disability and the health challenges that they have, or some disabilities as a health issue itself, not just as a condition? What are they doing? All become a cross-cutting agenda.
Yes.
And then as a council, then how can we help, or how can we engage and negotiate to come up with a clear framework of how do that cross-cutting agenda on disability looks like? In terms of a framework, in terms of engaging each other, how does it look like? And how could we continue producing such a report to show where are we progressing? And if we are not progressing, why are we not progressing? Where is the rain start beating us that we need to correct a few things here and there? And recognizing that disability much as an expensive lifestyle, it will be with us for life.
Yeah.
It's something that we'll never run away from.
True.
Yes.
Because as you're speaking, I'm thinking of disabilities that can actually be reversed. Some that can be managed, again, to the point where the individual who has that particular disability can function well and productively within society. But then there's also the understanding that the general public who do not have these disabilities and need, because even as you factor in matters that concern specifically people with disabilities, they live with people who don't have disabilities. And people who don't have disabilities are more likely not to understand.
It's true.
And when you have people who don't have disabilities supporting these causes, you then have a body mass that is able to push these agendas much, much further.
It's true.
Yes.
They say it is the shoe wearer who knows where to be.
Pinches, yes.
Yeah.
So if you don't live there, you will never know.
No.
The last time when I was here, I shared my own story.
Yes.
How I ended up on a wheelchair.
Yes.
And before then, I couldn't have
Imagine.
a clue of what disability is all about.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have understood. Well, what I know now,
Yes.
I don't think I would have taken time even to know. So sometimes I'm a bit tolerant with the society because it is a representation of me when I was there. Yeah. So it takes a while for you to get sensitized. Either you should have a family member, or you're living there, or maybe you're in that space professionally working. So it looks. But you see, on the flip side, no one wants to discriminate people with disability. No one. Like if I fall out of this wheelchair, both of you will rush and pick me up.
Yes.
That's a love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
But you might not understand my inclusion approach.
Yes.
It's the level of awareness maybe that is, until I draw your attention toward that, then you say, oh, really? Then we have to fix here,
Yeah.
So that's how, we have to also engage the society from that kind of an angle, that maybe the awareness is low, how can we raise?
Right.
We also preach to even persons with disability, let's be less combative. Let combativeness be our last, very, 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 very last
resort.
That you have reached kind of a dead end, something like that. Engage from the perspective that people don't know your need. The moment you explain in best way possible, people will open the doors for you. So we also engage, our style of approach, and
The thing that why I'm laughing as you're speaking.
Yes.
I'm looking at the strides we have made in trying to be all inclusive, and one of the ways is in a parking slot. Okay, it's clearly marked.
Yes.
Okay. Now the thing that I find interesting, I like observing. People think it's a free parking where anybody can park.
Exactly.
Because somebody parks and I'm waiting to see, okay, what disability does this person have?
Yeah.
There's absolutely no disability unless there's something wrong with their mind.
Yes.
But
Could be.
it could be. But on the face of it,
Yes.
there's nothing you can see physically wrong. What I haven't gotten to is the point of asking, are you not aware that you're taking up a space that you don't qualify to take?
Exactly.
Yes. But the truth is, that somebody can ignore it is not necessarily a negative thing. It means that because they know that very rarely will somebody with a disability use that parking, so they think, okay? it also means that they are aware that the people, the awareness of people living with disabilities is in their mind. It's just that it's being expressed in a manner that is not entirely positive, but they are aware.
Exactly, like maybe was saying something on that parking. Some people even don't know. Something that it is some embassies, something it is a UN thing. Some people even might not know. And then the other thing is some abuse.
Yeah.
Because they rarely see people with disability to come park there because they are fewer. So even as a council, we are looking at how we can come up with a sticker for disabled people with a QR code that you can scan and it invalidates that car truly is someone with disabilities.
Yes.
But on inclusivity also, like in public toilet, for example, you've seen the public toilet for people with disability, it has a big sign.
Yes.
And if you enter, you've seen it's very spacious and beautiful,
It's
right?
very spacious, yes.
But you find some people fear to get inside there. They queue for other times.
So they think there's something wrong.
So in building inclusive society, we want to say that the thing should be gender, female and male, but it should be for everybody. It should be that big
for everyone.
that everyone can get in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wewe unasimama line, hata mimi na park my wheelchair nyuma yako, ukitoka mimi naingia. You see, there's no restriction.
Yeah.
Because what we have, the issue of building, the challenge we have, when the buildings were designed by architects, they designed it so beautifully with those features. But when you take that plan and you want to build, the owner tells the foreman, but don't waste this space. Sasa tumepata approval. Hii finye hapa, weka ka room ingine hapa.
So I think that gives rise to another issue here, and that's just looking at inclusion across board, whether you're looking at the private sector or you're looking at the public sector, that the issue of funding sometimes comes in. And everybody wants to say, okay, yes, we'll do that. We can, but then we're limited by our funds. And that's usually sometimes the reason that they would give as to why they would not then practice inclusion or at least entrench inclusion. How do we navigate that particular challenge? Because I know that it can be given as an excuse just flippantly, but for some people it is a valid concern that, we try but we can't because we're limited by funding options.
I think that's just an excuse.
Okay.
Because it has to do with enforcement. For example, if buildings are designed and it is approved, it must conform with universal design. It must have the ramp. It must have access and, for everything. The lift must be braille for the blind people. It's a must. So when you're already building, you are not reorganizing your existing house. That can be a different thing. Where maybe you can even apply to KRA maybe for tax relief or something. That's a different thing. The old buildings, for example, are challenges, right? If it's a public transport, you see, much as we have not enforced, it must for people. Person with disability must access public transport, like matatus, like buses. You can imagine. Look how life is tough for people with disability. If you are blind, you are always accompanied by a person who guides you.
Yeah, guide, yes.
So you are having 2 seats. No.
Yes.
If you're using a wheelchair, you are paying for 2 more seats plus yours. One for your wheelchair, one for your guide, and one for yourself. Yes. And but even beyond that, it's not even accessible for you. And sometimes the matatus are always on hurry. Or public transport, they say 20, so you might find someone on a small stage for more than an hour, like when it is raining even right now, getting wet and drenched, and such kind of a thing. So you can imagine, it can be really tough, isn't it? So public transport and public buildings is a must that you must, So the issue we have, and what this report is even recommending, could entities like a council and other associated be giving a teeth to bite, an enforcement capacity to enforce some of these things. That's when we, So I think it's more of doing with enforcement.
But Harun, thinking about this, when you mentioned transport, I was actually just picturing this thing in my mind of somebody, say for instance, with a wheelchair waiting at a bus stop. Okay. Does the council or has the council taken the initiative to talk? Because all these transports, all these matatus have circles, they have they're well organized.
Yes.
Has the council taken time to actually educate these people into understanding what they need to do in order to cater for people with disabilities?
Exactly. We are engaging Matatu owners and Matatu Welfare Association. You remember the gentleman, Mr. Mbuko, who is, as a chair. We had several meetings with them, and we are signing an MOU with them. And within that MOU, we have raft of ideas. Whether it is the welfare side, whether it is the owners of the Matatu side, how cool. While of course we engage from the perspective of even policy and legal issue with Minister of Transport, but since private sector in Kenya is more of run by private sector, we have to engage them in the best way. Remember, now how can you convince a Matatu guy that he kiti yangu ya wheelchair unibebe free?
Yeah. It's taking up a space.
Yes. And these guys are, so there should be a negotiation so we have started a negotiation with them. I think very soon we're going to have an MOU with them. That is what we'll be doing. But as the government also looks at how they're regulating or they continue to regulate public, sector, especially in public vehicles, there should be a provision where there are ramps. Where you have seen in the West, if you get into the bus, space for you to park.
Yes.
And everybody knows.
Yes.
A ramp comes out, you wheel in, the stages, what. Much as we are progressing toward there, how can we relook at the policies governing public, transport system to be inclusive? So this is where we have a big problem.
Yeah.
Yes.
And this is why I think it's important to have these conversations, because like you said, there's a sensitivity whereby we understand, but there's also the sensitivity where, like you said, folks don't understand, don't know. How can we agitate for something that we don't know about? And so that's why I think it's important to continue to have these conversations and continue to push them and advocate for some of these things. And at this point, I want to say to you, Harun, thank you so much for coming this morning.
Thank you.
I think that there are very, very many more opportunities to discuss some of these things till we get to the point where, at the very least, we're at a satisfactory level, isn't it? Thank you so much for being here this morning. And even as we wrap that up, the Executive Director of the National Council for Persons with Disabilities, Harun Maalim Hassan, has been our guest this hour. And as we've been looking at some of those things, the hope is that we can continue to push for them into the future. Thanks for being part of Kenya's biggest conversation this entire week.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.